Tell me again what the scouts reported. Mace Windu stood at the center of the war room, arms folded, a stillness in his frame that the clones around him had learned to read correctly. Not calm, exactly, but the specific controlled stillness of a man deciding how seriously to take something he didn't yet understand. Commander Thorne set a holographic projector on the table, jaw tight beneath his helmet. I'd rather show you, General. The hologram flickered to life, grainy, taken from a helmet cam that had clearly been moving fast, its owner clearly not stopping to frame the shot carefully. A corridor inside an abandoned separatist research station on the dead moon of Kalar's outer belt. Walls scorched from some old battle that predated whatever had happened here. Clone troopers moving in formation, sweeping the facility with the disciplined efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. Then something in the corridor ahead of them that shouldn't have been there. 7 feet of it. Broad-shouldered, slow-moving, the kind of unhurried that didn't come from confidence so much as from complete indifference to whether anything ahead of it intended harm. A white mask, featureless, catching what little light the corridor offered and throwing none of it back. Dark clothing, torn at the edges in ways that suggested damage rather than fashion. One massive hand wrapped around the haft of a machete that looked older than anything in this galaxy had a right to be. The clone troopers raised their weapons. Standard protocol, standard formation, the kind that had stopped separatist infiltrators, force-sensitive assassins, and rogue bounty hunters without significant incident across 3 years of war. The figure didn't stop, didn't acknowledge the weapons, didn't change its pace by a single fractional degree. Windu watched the hologram in absolute silence as the sequence played out. The troopers firing, bolts connecting with the figure's chest and shoulder, with impacts that should have dropped a Wookiee. The figure absorbing each one without breaking stride, without flinching, without making a sound that carried through the helmet cam's audio in any register the suit could classify. The hologram cut to static 14 seconds later. How many survivors? Windu asked. Thorne's jaw tightened. 2, General. And the only reason they survived is they were at the far end of the corridor when it started. They didn't fight their way out. A beat. Waited. They ran. Windu walked to the viewport, Coruscant's skyline stretching endlessly below, and spent a long moment doing what he'd spent his whole career training himself to do. Reaching into the Force, reading the shape of the situation, feeling for the truth beneath the data. He found nothing. Not the nothing of empty space, which had its own texture. Something else. A blankness that felt less like absence and more like a wound. A place where the Force simply refused to resolve into information. That, more than the hologram, was what settled cold in his chest. I need Master Yoda informed, he said. Tonight. The dead moon of Kalar's outer belt had been quiet for 11 years. Abandoned after a failed separatist mining operation had stripped it of anything worth extracting and left behind only scorched corridors and the silence that follows industrial violence. Nobody had thought to wonder what the separatists might have accidentally opened during 3 years of drilling into rock formations older than the Republic itself. Nobody had thought to wonder what might have come through the crack they left. Jedi Master Bola Ropal had arrived on Kalar 2 days before the clones, responding to a force disturbance so faint it barely registered as more than unease. The kind of thing a less experienced Jedi would have dismissed as static, background noise from a war-heavy galaxy generating more darkness than the Force could comfortably process. Ropal was not a less experienced Jedi. He moved through the station's lower corridors alone, lightsaber unlit but hand resting on its hilt. The Force sensitivity he'd spent 40 years developing pushed outward like a hand searching in the dark for a wall, finding nothing. Repeatedly, consistently, impossibly nothing. He rounded a corner and stopped. The figure at the end of the corridor was looking at him, or at least the white mask was oriented in his direction, which was the closest thing to a gaze it offered. One hand held the machete loosely, the way a practitioner holds a familiar weapon, without tension, because tension suggests uncertainty. The other hand rested at its side. Ropal ignited his lightsaber, green blade humming to life in the corridor's dim light, casting the figure in emerald and shadow. I am Jedi Master Bola Ropal. He kept his voice even, the trained calm of a man who'd talked down warlords and crime lords and force-corrupted individuals across a long career. "I don't know what you are, or where you came from, but I'm asking you to stand down." The figure's head tilted, a fraction, barely perceptible, the specific tilt of something encountering a stimulus it was processing without urgency. Then, it took a step forward. Ropal had fought Sith, dark side assassins, creatures strong enough in the Force to shake the ground they stood on. He'd read danger in the Force 100 times, the specific warning that preceded real violence, the galaxy's oldest alarm system firing in the base of the skull. Felt nothing from this figure. Not darkness, not light, not the clouded murk of the morally compromised or the hot burn of the genuinely evil. Not aggression, not hatred, not even the mechanical coldness of a droid calculating threat probabilities. Just the same blankness he'd been reading from the moment he stepped onto this moon, shaped now into something that walked toward him with the unhurried patience of a thing that had never once, in its entire existence, considered the possibility of being stopped. Ropal moved first, the right call, tactically, the Jedi's advantage always in the initiative. His lightsaber swept in a practiced arc, fast, precise, aimed to disable rather than destroy. The blade connected with the machete's flat and slid, sparking. The metal wrong somehow, ancient, resisting the plasma edge in a way no ordinary steel should have managed. The figure's arm didn't buckle under the impact, didn't even shift with it. What happened in the next 40 seconds, the Force didn't record, because the Force couldn't see it. What Commander Thorne's scouts found, when they swept the corridor 6 hours later, was Ropal's lightsaber lying on the ground, its blade extinguished, its owner gone, and a set of footprints in the corridor's thin layer of dust, moving away from the scene with the same unhurried, even stride, carrying now, in the hand that had previously held only a machete, something that pulsed faint green in the darkness ahead. "Say that again." Anakin Skywalker's voice came out quieter than usual, which was always the more dangerous register. Commander Thorne stood at attention across the briefing table, the kind of rigid stillness that came from a man who'd learned, across 3 years of war, that delivering bad news to Jedi generals required the same posture as standing in the middle of a firefight. A figure, General, 7 feet, white mask, moving through Kalar Station's lower corridors on foot. No ship, no droid escort, no faction markings of any kind. And Ropal's lightsaber. Anakin's jaw tightened. "You're certain it was his?" Green blade, his serial inscription on the hilt. Thorne set the recovered weapon on the table between them, its surface unmarked, despite everything the hologram had suggested happened in that corridor. Whoever took it didn't damage it, just carried it away. Obi-Wan, standing at the viewport with his hands folded behind his back, hadn't moved since the briefing began. "You said 2 survivors. What did they report beyond what the helmet cam recorded?" "That's the part I've been trying to figure out how to say, Master Kenobi." Thorne's composure held, but only barely. "They said it didn't make any sound. Not during, not after. No breathing, no footsteps registering on their audio sensors, no vocalization of any kind." He looked between the 2 Jedi, something deeply uneasy in his eyes beneath the professionalism. 12 men fired on it. Direct hits, at least 7 of them center mass. It didn't bleed, didn't slow, didn't respond. Anakin's hand went to his lightsaber, not drawing it, just resting there, the way it always did when his mind was working faster than the situation had given him permission to act. Obi-Wan turned from the viewport. "What about the Force?" "Sir? What did your men feel when they encountered it?" "Fear, obviously. But fear of what specifically?" Thorne was quiet long enough that the silence became its own answer. "That's the thing, Master Kenobi. They didn't feel anything coming from it, said it was like looking at a wall. You know a wall's there because you can see it, but you don't feel anything from it because there's nothing behind it to feel." Obi-Wan and Anakin exchanged a look, the specific wordless communication of 2 men who'd spent enough years fighting together that entire conversations happened in the space between a glance. "I want a full battalion on Kalar," Anakin said. "Armor, heavy artillery, and an ATTE on standby. If this thing is still in that station." "It isn't." Thorne pulled up a new hologram, a topographical scan of Kalar's outer surface. It walked out. through the station's exterior wall. Not a breach. The structural integrity reads intact. We're still trying to understand what that means. He highlighted a trail of sensor anomalies moving east across the moon's surface. And it's been moving consistently since. Same pace, same direction. We don't know where it's heading because there's nothing in that direction. The moon's dead. There's nothing out there. There's nothing out there that we know about, Obi-Wan said quietly. He reached into the Force as he said it. The same instinct Windu had followed from Coruscant. The same deep read a Jedi performs when data runs out, and intuition is the last remaining tool. He found the same wound in the Force that Windu had found. The same blankness, except it was moving, now, which somehow made it more disturbing than it had been standing still. Empty space didn't move with direction and purpose. Even a void had its own ambient character in the Force. This moved like something that intended to be somewhere. We go personally, Obi-Wan said, straightening. You and I. Light presence, no large battalion to escalate whatever this is, before we understand it. He glanced at Anakin's expression, already predictably resistant to anything involving the phrase light presence. A confrontation isn't the first step here. Understanding is. Understanding's great until 12 more clones are dead. Anakin's eyes hadn't left the topographical trail on the hologram. Then we understand quickly. Obi-Wan's tone carried its usual immovable patience. What we're not doing is sending a battalion against something that absorbed 7 direct blaster shots to the chest without registering them. Until we know what we're dealing with, more firepower isn't a strategy. It's just more casualties with extra steps. Anakin's jaw worked. He didn't argue the logic, which was as close to agreement as he usually got. There's something else, Thorne said, and something in his voice made both Jedi look at him directly. I ran a galaxy-wide search on the description. White mask, that specific build, the weapon profile. Cross-referenced everything. Republic records, Imperial Separatist intel, bounty hunter databases, archaeological logs from the Outer Rim. He set a datapad on the table, its screen blank. Nothing. No match anywhere. Not a legend, not a rumor, not a myth. Not a single culture anywhere in the known galaxy has a record of anything remotely resembling what those 2 survivors described. Obi-Wan picked up the datapad, stared at its empty screen. Which means it didn't come from here, he said. That's what I'm afraid of, sir. Thorne looked at them both, and for just a moment, the clone trooper's professional composure dropped entirely, leaving something behind it that looked, unmistakably, like genuine fear. In 3 years of war, I've reported a lot of things to Jedi generals. Things that didn't make sense until they did. Things that seemed impossible until we found an explanation. He looked at the blank datapad. I've never reported something that has no explanation available. Not even a wrong one. Outside the briefing room's narrow viewport, Calor's dead moon turned slowly in the dark, its surface featureless and indifferent. And somewhere on it, something moved through the silence with the patient, unhurried certainty of a thing that had never once in its existence needed to know where it was going, only that it wasn't finished. The transmission from Calor reached Count Dooku's flagship in the Outer Rim, 17 hours after Commander Thorne's briefing, relayed through 3 separate Separatist intelligence cells by the time it arrived, each one adding its own layer of confused annotation to a report that had already defied clean classification at its source. Dooku read it twice, set it down, picked it up, and read it a 3rd time. General Grievous, the cyborg general, materialized in the doorway with the specific impatience of a machine that found waiting structurally offensive. 4 arms shifting, vocabulator already cycling through the register it used when it expected to be sent somewhere violent. My lord, the Republic has encountered something on Calor's outer moon. Dooku set the datapad down with the measured deliberateness of a man choosing his words carefully, which was the only way he ever chose them. Something they cannot classify, cannot stop, and apparently cannot predict. Grievous's optical sensors narrowed. A weapon? Potentially more useful than a weapon. Dooku stood, moving to the viewport, stars burning cold and distant beyond the transparasteel. A weapon implies purpose, direction, a user behind it. What the Republic is describing behaves more like a force of nature. Indiscriminate, unstoppable. invisible to the Force itself. Something shifted in Grievous's posture, curiosity, wrestling with the mechanical arrogance that had gotten him into trouble against Jedi often enough that you'd think he'd have learned from it. He hadn't. Invisible to the Force, Grievous repeated, meaning the Jedi are blind to it. Precisely. Dooku turned from the viewport. Whatever this is, it represents a variable the Jedi have no framework for engaging, which means it represents an opportunity, if it can be studied, contained, and potentially redirected. His eyes found Grievous directly. Take a full battalion. Capture it if possible. If not possible, nothing is impossible to capture. Grievous's 4 hands flexed in sequence, the unconscious habit of a creature that solved most problems by closing its fingers around them. I'll bring it back in pieces if necessary. That, Dooku said quietly, is precisely the kind of overconfidence I'd encourage you to set aside before you land on that moon. Grievous was already turning toward the door. He landed on Kalar 6 hours later, with 600 battle droids, 2 destroyer droids in standby formation, and the specific swagger of a general who'd collected Jedi lightsabers the way other beings collected trophies and had stopped being impressed by things the Republic found frightening roughly 2 years into the war. The first sign that something was wrong came 12 minutes after deployment. Where are the Republic forces? His command droid, B1 series, swiveled its head with the mechanical obliviousness that had always made Grievous question the Separatists' investment in droid intelligence. Sensors show no active Republic units in this sector, General. They retreated. Grievous moved through the station's outer corridor, optical sensors scanning ahead, 4 hands resting on 4 lightsabers with the casual readiness of a being who'd trained himself to treat combat as a resting state. Which means whatever they encountered is still here. The droids spread into search formation, and for 4 minutes, the station was exactly what it appeared to be. Abandoned, cold. The only sound their own footsteps, and the distant groan of the moon's ancient infrastructure settling. Then the sounds started changing. Not an alarm, not blaster fire, something else. A rhythmic impact from the corridor ahead, metal on metal, steady and unhurried. The sound of something that wasn't being chased and wasn't chasing, just moving. Grievous raised one fist. Formation halted. The figure came around the corner, and even Grievous, who had looked Jedi Masters in the eyes while dismembering them and felt nothing but satisfaction, registered something that his cybernetic systems involuntarily logged as threat assessment. Insufficient data. The white mask, the height, the complete absence of any tactical posture or combat readiness, because combat readiness implied the figure had considered the possibility of losing, and nothing about its body language suggested it had ever had occasion to consider that. Ropal's green lightsaber hung at its belt, extinguished, claimed rather than wielded. A trophy it hadn't bothered to use, which was somehow worse than if it had been swinging it. Open fire, Grievous said. 240 battle droids raised their weapons simultaneously and delivered the kind of coordinated volley that had broken Republic defensive lines on a dozen planets, enough concentrated energy discharge to melt through a starfighter's hull plating at close range. The figure walked through it. Not around it, through it. Arms at its sides, pace unchanged, blaster bolts connecting with its body, and scorching cloth, and doing nothing underneath the cloth that the droid's sensors could register as damage response. A destroyer droid unfolded into its attack configuration and opened up with both repeating blasters at point-blank range. The figure grabbed it, one hand, around the forward strut, and the motion that followed was less combat and more the mechanical removal of an obstacle. A swing, a impact against the corridor wall, a second impact, and then the destroyer droid was simply no longer a functional object. Grievous watched 30 more droids go down in the next 90 seconds and performed the rarest calculation of his military career. A genuine, unironic reassessment. "Fall back," he said. The command droid turned its head. "General?" "Fall back." The words came out with a precision that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the tactical intelligence that, whatever his arrogance, had kept Grievous alive through 3 years of a war nobody expected him to survive. Regroup at the landing zone. Maintain visual on the target at maximum sensor range. He retreated down the corridor, and for the first time in a long time, Grievous moved fast. Not fleeing, he would never classify it as fleeing, but moving with a purpose that prioritized distance over dignity. Behind him, the figure collected another droid that hadn't gotten the retreat order fast enough, and the sound it made when it stopped functioning joined the growing silence of everything else on Kalar that had already discovered, too late, that the galaxy's standard assumptions about violence and consequence simply did not apply here. Grievous reached the landing zone and opened a direct channel to Dooku's flagship, breathing hard through his vocabulator in a way he'd have denied if anyone had recorded it. "My lord." A long silence on Dooku's end. The silence of a man reading his general's biometric transmission and understanding what the elevated readings meant before a single word of report had been filed. "Tell me," Dooku said. "It cannot be captured." Grievous stared back at the station entrance, where the figure had emerged into Kalar's pale exterior light, and stopped. Not pursuing, not retreating, just standing, white mask angled toward the landing zone, with the patience of something that had nowhere else to be, and no particular urgency about being there. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be stopped with conventional force. Another difficult silence. "I lost 40 droids in under 2 minutes. The destroyer units are gone. And you?" Grievous looked at the station entrance again, at the figure standing motionless in the pale light, and said the thing he'd never said in 3 years of war, the thing his entire identity had been built around never having to say. "I chose not to engage further," he said carefully, "for tactical reasons." Dooku's response, when it came, wasn't satisfaction or recrimination. It was something quieter, and in its quietness, considerably more unsettling. "Then we escalate this to a different level of attention entirely." A pause, measured, deliberate. "I believe it's time to inform Lord Sidious." Obi-Wan felt it before they broke atmosphere. Not the figure itself, that remained the same impossible blankness, a hole in the Force shaped like something that walked upright and carried a dead man's lightsaber. What he felt was the aftermath. The specific texture the Force developed around violence it couldn't process. Not darkness. Darkness had a character, a warmth to it, like something burning wrong. This was different. This was the Force flinching. "You feel that?" Anakin said. Not a question. "I feel what surrounds it." Obi-Wan kept his eyes on Kalar's surface as their ship descended, the moon's pale terrain spreading below them, featureless and still, like standing near a wound that won't close. The Force isn't responding to this thing. It's responding to the absence of this thing. That's not a distinction that makes me feel better. It wasn't meant to. Obi-Wan's voice stayed level. It was meant to prepare you. They landed at the station's outer perimeter with a single squad of clone troopers. Obi-Wan's compromise against Anakin's preference for a full assault force and the Council's preference for no assault force at all until more was understood. Commander Cody moved at the rear of the formation with the professional calm of a man who'd followed these 2 Jedi into enough impossible situations that impossible had simply become a synonym for Tuesday. The station's outer corridors bore the marks of what had happened here. Scorch patterns from blaster fire that covered every surface. Droid parts scattered in configurations that told a story of something wading through rather than fighting through. The specific geometry of destruction left by an entity that hadn't been trying to win a battle so much as simply continuing to move while a battle happened around it. Anakin crouched beside a destroyed destroyer droid, running a hand along the twisted strut. Grievous deployed destroyer units and retreated. Obi-Wan studied the damage pattern carefully, which means whatever we're walking toward made Grievous decide that collecting lightsaber trophies wasn't worth the cost of this particular engagement. Grievous retreated. Anakin straightened slowly, something deeply unsettled moving behind his eyes. I've never said those 2 words in that order before. Try not to enjoy it too much. The reason he retreated is still out there. They found the trail on the moon's surface, the same sensor anomaly Thorn's scouts had logged. A directional path cutting east across Kalar's barren terrain. Still moving, still maintaining the same pace it had held since it first walked out of the station. Obi-Wan pushed his Force sense outward, following the trail's direction, and hit the blankness again. Closer now, close enough that it had a shape to it, an edge, like pressing your palm against glass and feeling nothing of what was on the other side. "It's ahead," he said. "Not far." They found him in a shallow crater half a kilometer from the station, standing at its center, motionless, the way he'd been standing when Grievous retreated, as if he'd simply stopped walking when the pursuit ended and hadn't yet found a reason to start again. Ropal's green lightsaber hung at his belt. The machete was in his right hand, catching what little light Caller's sun offered at this angle. The clones raised their weapons on instinct. Cody's hand signal held them, finger extended, the hold command, followed immediately by the specific gesture that meant wait for Jedi instruction, and underneath that, just barely legible in Cody's expression, something that looked like please don't make us shoot this thing. Obi-Wan stepped forward, alone, hands visible and open, lightsaber undrawn. "My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi." His voice carried the practiced calm that had talked sense into Sith apprentices and crime lords, and once, memorably, a rancor that was somehow the most reasonable party in that particular negotiation. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to understand what you are." The white mask oriented toward him, that fractional tilt of the head, the same one Ropal had seen before everything went wrong, the processing gesture of something that registered stimulus without urgency. Obi-Wan reached into the Force, carefully, the way you extend a hand towards something that might bite. Not to read the figure, he'd already established that was impossible, but to read the space around him, to understand the shape of what the Force was reacting to. What came back stopped him cold. Not darkness, not malevolence, not the hot, recognizable burn of a being that had chosen violence as a philosophy the way the Sith did. Not even the animal simplicity of a predator following instinct. Nothing. A genuine, complete nothing. So total that it had its own gravity. The Force bending around this figure the way light bent around something that swallowed it. The galaxy's fundamental energy field simply declining to engage with this specific point in space. "Anakin," Obi-Wan said quietly, not turning around. "Don't." He'd felt Anakin's hand move toward his lightsaber without needing to look, reading his former apprentice the way only a decade of partnership made possible. "He's got Ropal's lightsaber," Anakin said, the controlled low voice he used when the thing he wanted to do and the thing he was being asked to do were in direct, active conflict. "I know. Master, he killed Ropal. I know." Obi-Wan kept his eyes on the white mask, on the complete, alien stillness of the figure in the crater. "And attacking him immediately, without understanding what we're dealing with, will tell us absolutely nothing useful while possibly adding our names to whatever list Ropal's name is now on." A long, difficult silence from behind him. Anakin didn't draw his lightsaber. Obi-Wan turned his attention back to the figure and tried something he'd never needed to try in 40 years of Force sensitivity. He tried to make peace with the absence, to read the nothing the way you'd read a text, to find information in a blank space rather than in the information it contained. What he found, at the very edge of where the nothing began, was something that chilled him more thoroughly than anything the Clone Wars had yet managed. The Force wasn't blind to this figure by accident or by some quirk of dimensional travel. The Force was blind to it, the way eyes were blind to something that existed in a spectrum they weren't built to process. This thing didn't register in the Force because it wasn't built from the same reality the Force was built from. It was matter and mass, and clearly capable of interacting with this galaxy's physical laws. But underneath those physical laws, at the level where midi-chlorians and the living force and the fundamental energy of existence all connected, this thing was made of something else entirely. Something the Force had no category for. Something the Force had no defense against. Obi-Wan exhaled slowly, and did something generals and Jedi Masters and veteran soldiers rarely did when standing 40 feet from an unknown threat. He took a step back. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "All of us, now." Cody's eyebrows rose above his helmet's rim, visible even at this distance. "General?" "Now, Commander." Obi-Wan turned, walking back toward the formation, with the deliberate, measured pace of a man refusing to show retreat in his spine, even while performing it. "We're not equipped for this conversation today." Anakin fell into step beside him, something deeply frustrated and deeply unsettled in equal measure, fighting for control of his expression. That's it? We just walk away? We walk away. We report to the Council what the Force cannot see. And we start asking questions that have nothing to do with the Force. Because the Force, for the first time in my experience, is not the right tool for this problem. Obi-Wan kept his voice low, even, stripped of the weight it was actually carrying. Whatever that is, it didn't come from this galaxy. It didn't come from any place the Force has ever touched. Behind them, the figure in the crater watched them go. Or at least, the white mask tracked their departure, which was the only watching it had to offer. It didn't follow, didn't call after them, didn't make any motion at all, until the ship had lifted clear of Kalar's surface and the moon's pale terrain had shrunk to a pale disk in the viewport. Then it started walking again. Same direction, same pace, same unhurried, patient certainty. East, across Kalar's dead surface, toward nothing, unless you counted the faint, irregular signal that had appeared on Separatist sensors 6 hours ago, broadcasting from a crashed shuttle 2 kilometers past the crater, carrying a Republic frequency nobody had thought to investigate yet. Carrying, specifically, a life sign. The life sign in the crashed shuttle belonged to a clone trooper named CT-7719, call sign Wraith, separated from his unit during a reconnaissance mission 3 days before any of this started. Before Ropal, before Grievous, before the galaxy started asking questions it didn't have frameworks to answer. He'd been there the whole time, trapped under a collapsed forward bulkhead, surviving on emergency rations and recycled air, and the specific stubborn refusal to die that the Kaminoans had either accidentally or deliberately bred into every clone they'd ever produced. He'd also, from the shuttle's cracked viewport, watched everything. It walked past me twice, Wraith said, voice steady in the way voices went steady when the alternative was coming apart entirely. He sat across from Obi-Wan in the shuttle's cramped interior, a medic working on his trapped leg, with the focused silence of someone who'd stopped asking questions about the broader situation and committed entirely to the immediate task. First time was the night it arrived. Before the station, before your men, before the droids. It just walked past, looked at the shuttle. He stopped. Obi-Wan waited, looked at me through the viewport. Wraith's jaw tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't call for help, just sat there and looked back at it. A long breath, and it moved on. It didn't try to breach the shuttle, Obi-Wan said. No, sir. Do you know why? Wraith met his eyes, something difficult and honest in them. I've been trying to figure that out for 3 days. Best I can come up with, and I know how this sounds, is that I wasn't a threat. I wasn't moving toward it. I wasn't shooting at it. He looked at his hands. Everything I watched it respond to, it responded to the same way. Something came at it. It dealt with it. Something didn't come at it. He shrugged, a careful motion around the medic's work. It kept walking. Anakin, leaning against the shuttle's far wall, arms crossed, had been quiet since they'd found Wraith. The particular quiet that meant he was rebuilding his understanding of something from the foundation up, which he did rarely and reluctantly, and usually only when the evidence left him no alternative. So it's not hunting, he said. It's not looking for targets. It's just moving through. And anything that gets in the way of the moving through gets dealt with, Wraith finished. Yes, sir. That's what 3 days of watching it looks like from the outside. Anakin pushed off the wall. The restless energy of a man whose instinct for action had been forcibly redirected into thinking. Then we stop trying to get in the way of the moving through, and we figure out where it's moving to. That's the question nobody's asked yet, Obi-Wan agreed. He pulled up Kalar's topographical data on his wrist display, the sensor trail a clean, undeviated line cutting east across the moon's surface from the point of arrival. It arrived here. It hasn't changed direction once. It's been following the same heading since the moment it arrived, which means it either knows where it's going or it's being pulled there, Anakin said, looking at the map. Like a compass. Obi-Wan looked at him. What's at the end of that heading? Jarvis didn't exist here to answer the question. What they had instead was the Republic's survey database, 3 years out of date on Kalar's outer belt, and a single notation at the edge of the moon's mapped territory that read, Geological anomaly, non-standard mineral composition, survey incomplete. We need a full geological scan of that anomaly, Obi-Wan said. Before it gets there. Before it gets there and what? Anakin's voice carried the edge it always carried when strategy required patience, and patience wasn't what the moment felt like it demanded. Before it gets there, and we find out the hard way, what happens when something that arrived through a dimensional crack in reality walks directly back into one. The words settled over the shuttle's interior, like a drop in temperature. The medic stopped working for just a moment, then started again without comment, because 3 years of war had taught clone medics that there were conversations happening above their pay grade that it was healthier not to fully absorb. Wraith, however, absorbed it. "Sir, are you saying there's another one? Another, whatever this is?" "I'm saying I don't know what's at the end of that geological anomaly." Obi-Wan looked at the map. "I'm saying something that moves with this kind of directional certainty, from the first moment of arrival, without any apparent reconnaissance, is either following a signal or following an instinct. And in either case, the destination matters as much as the traveler." The transmission that interrupted them came through on the Republic's emergency command frequency. High priority, Council flagged. The specific coding that meant whatever was on the other end had already bypassed 3 layers of normal communication protocol to get through. Master Windu's face resolved on the shuttle's damaged comm screen, expression carrying something Obi-Wan hadn't seen on it in a very long time. Genuine alarm. "We've received word from a separatist intelligence contact," Windu said, without preamble, without the Council's usual measured opening. "Dooku has escalated this directly to Darth Sidious." The shuttle went completely silent. "Sidious is taking a personal interest," Windu continued, "which means whatever he's planning, it moves faster than anything we can coordinate through normal Council channels. We need you back on Coruscant. Now." "With respect, Master Windu," Obi-Wan said carefully, "the situation on Kalar requires—" "The situation on Kalar is about to become significantly more complicated." Windu's jaw tightened. "Our contact says Sidious isn't sending an inquisitor. He's dispatching his own personal envoy with authority to negotiate, a beat that carried its full weight. He believes this thing can be turned into an asset." Anakin made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, the short, disbelieving exhale of a man who'd watched Grievous retreat and was now processing the idea of Palpatine's personal representative attempting a diplomatic conversation with whatever had caused it. "He's going to try to recruit it," Anakin said flatly. "He's going to try to understand it well enough to control it," Windu corrected, "which is considerably more dangerous than recruitment." His eyes found Obi-Wan's through the damaged screen. "Because if Palpatine figures out what this thing responds to before we do, he will use it. Somehow, whatever it costs." Obi-Wan looked at the topographical map on his wrist display, at the undeviated line, cutting east toward an anomaly nobody had properly investigated, at the end point of a journey that a thing from somewhere outside this galaxy had been following since the moment it arrived. "How long before Sidious's envoy reaches Kalar?" he asked. 18 hours. Then we have 17. He closed the wrist display. Decision made, the particular stillness settling over him that Anakin recognized as his master having committed to a course of action that was going to be either brilliant or catastrophic, and having accepted both possibilities with equal composure. "We follow the trail. We reach the anomaly first, and we figure out what's drawing it there before Sidious figures out how to use that answer against every living thing in this galaxy." Outside the shuttle, on Kalar's pale surface, the figure moved east in the gathering dark, patient as geology, unhurried as tide, carrying a dead Jedi's lightsaber toward a destination nobody in this galaxy had yet thought to be afraid of. The anomaly wasn't geological. It had been logged as one. The survey team that passed through Kalar's outer belt 18 months ago had recorded it as non-standard mineral composition, filed it under investigation pending, and moved on to things that mattered more during a war that hadn't left anyone time for curiosity about dead moons. What Obi-Wan's scanner resolved, standing at its edge in Kalar's thin pre-dawn light, was something considerably more specific than unusual rock formation. It was a scar. Not metaphorical, a physical scar in the ground itself, running 40 meters in a straight line. The earth on either side of it compressed and fused in a way that suggested extreme force applied from above. The way a blade leaves a mark in wood, rather than the way geology leaves a mark in itself. Old, but not ancient. Years, not centuries. Something came through here, Anakin said, scanning the compressed earth, the force in him reaching automatically for information his eyes couldn't provide. He hit the blankness again, the same wall that had met every force read on this moon since they'd arrived. Except here it was older, settled, the blankness of something that had been here long enough for the wound to scar over, rather than still bleed. This is where it arrived. Years ago, Obi-Wan said quietly, whatever opened here opened long before this war, long before we had any reason to be on this moon. Anakin looked up from the scar. You're saying it's been here this whole time? I'm saying it arrived here some time ago, and has been somewhere on this moon since then, and that nothing disturbed it, nothing crossed its path, nothing gave it occasion to respond, until the Separatists set up that research station and started sending people through its territory. The understanding settled over Anakin's face slowly, the way understanding settled when it rearranged something you thought you already knew. It wasn't hunting us. It was never hunting anyone. Obi-Wan straightened, looking back along the trail they'd followed east across Calor's surface, the undeviated line that had looked, from a distance, like purposeful navigation. It was going home, following the scar back to the point of arrival, looking for the way back to wherever it came from. He looked at the fused Earth, and it's been trying to do that since long before any of us arrived on this moon. A long silence, broken only by Calor's thin wind moving across the crater's rim. We've been treating this as an invasion, Anakin said. Everyone has. Republic, Separatists, Grievous, the Council. Obi-Wan turned to face the direction they'd come from. Back toward the station, back toward the trail of destroyed droids and dead clones, and the terrible geometry of what happened when something that just wanted to find its way home kept being attacked by things that didn't understand what they were provoking. We sent soldiers at something that interpreted every single one of them as an obstacle rather than an enemy, because to it, that's exactly what they were. Anakin's jaw worked through something complicated. That doesn't change what happened to Ropal. No, it doesn't. Obi-Wan's voice carried the weight of that plainly, without flinching. It doesn't change any of the dead, but it changes what this is. And what this is, changes what we do next. His wrist comm activated before he could say what that was. Cody's voice, tight, carrying the specific compression of a soldier delivering information he'd rather not be delivering. General Kenobi, we've got a ship inbound. Not Republic. Markings are unusual. No standard Separatist configuration. It's running a private frequency, encrypted, and it's descending toward the station coordinates. Sidious's envoy. Obi-Wan looked at Anakin. 14 hours early. Either our intelligence was wrong about the timeline, Anakin said, already moving back toward their ship, or Sidious moved faster than expected the moment he decided this was worth his personal attention. Both things can be true simultaneously. Obi-Wan fell into step beside him. Cody, do not intercept that ship. Do not engage, do not hail, do not make any contact whatsoever. We observe. Copy that, General. Though I should mention, a fractional hesitation that carried its own information. The trail sensors show our subject changed direction 17 minutes ago. Obi-Wan stopped walking. Changed direction? Yes, sir. It was heading east, toward your position, toward the anomaly. 17 minutes ago it turned. Another hesitation. It's heading back toward the station. Like it heard the new ship coming in somehow. Even though it's got no sensors we can identify, and the ship was still beyond this moon's atmosphere 17 minutes ago. Obi-Wan and Anakin looked at each other. It didn't hear the ship, Anakin said slowly. It felt it. Not through the Force. Something else. Some other sense we don't have a name for yet. Or, Obi-Wan said, something cold and precise settling into his voice. It recognized something about who was on the ship. The way any creature recognizes, on a level below conscious thought, a specific category of threat it has encountered before. Sidious, Anakin breathed. You think it knows what Sidious is? I think it's possible that whatever this thing is, wherever it came from, it has encountered the category of evil that Sidious represents before. And whatever that encounter looked like, This thing walked away from it. Obi-Wan started moving again, faster now, which means Sidious is about to attempt a negotiation with something that has already, in its own history, made a decision about what to do with the kind of power Sidious represents. They reached their ship as the unknown vessel touched down near the station's outer perimeter, its ramp descending with the deliberate theatrical timing of someone who understood the value of an entrance. The figure that emerged was tall, dark-robed, moving with the unhurried authority of someone who had never in living memory needed to consider whether a room would receive them correctly. Not Sidious himself, a proxy, but a proxy carrying enough dark side presence that Obi-Wan felt it from 200 meters away. Thick and deliberate, a man who'd been trained to project power as a first language. He walked toward the station entrance carrying a single object, a device Obi-Wan's scanner identified as a translation matrix combined with a signal amplifier, as if the dark side's ambassador had arrived prepared to have a conversation. He actually thinks he can talk to it, Anakin said, disbelief flattening his voice entirely. He thinks everything can be negotiated with, if you find the right currency. Obi-Wan watched the dark-robed figure disappear into the station. It's the foundational assumption of the Sith. Power recognizes power. Everything has a price. Everything can be turned. And when it doesn't work? From inside the station, the silence lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Cody's helmet timer, running from the moment the envoy entered to the moment the sounds started, and the sounds lasted considerably less than that. Then nothing. The specific, absolute nothing of a situation that had resolved itself without survivors to report the resolution. The station entrance stayed empty for a long time. When the figure finally emerged back into Calor's pale light, it was alone, unhurried, moving east again. The same direction, the same pace, back toward the anomaly at the moon's edge. Except now, hanging at its belt alongside Ropal's green lightsaber, was something new. Something that gleamed red in the pale light. The color of a blade nobody built red accidentally. The color of a weapon that took deliberate darkness to construct. Anakin's breath left him in a long, slow exhale. It took his lightsaber too. It takes them from everyone, Obi-Wan said quietly. Not as trophies. I don't think it understands the concept of trophies. He watched the figure move east across the terrain. 2 lightsabers at its belt, machete in its hand, unhurried as geology. I think it takes them the way you take a tool that belonged to someone who no longer needs it. Practical. Without sentiment. Sidious, Anakin said, and this time, the name didn't carry its usual weight of complicated loyalty. It just carried weight. Sidious is going to hear that his envoy didn't come back. And then what does he do? The answer to that question arrived on Calor's surface 6 hours later, before either of them had fully decided what to do with the answer they'd already found. A ship 3 times the size of the envoy's vessel, carrying no diplomatic markings whatsoever. Its landing struts touching Calor's surface with the finality of something that hadn't come to negotiate. Obi-Wan's scanner read its passenger manifest. Encrypted, but not encrypted enough. Not against the slicing skills Anakin had spent 3 years of war quietly perfecting in ways the Council had chosen not to ask too many questions about. 1 passenger. No crew beyond minimum flight requirement. No guards. He's here himself, Anakin said, the scanner reading in his hand, something in his voice that had no name for itself yet. Sidious came personally. Obi-Wan didn't answer immediately. He was watching the figure on the terrain below, still moving east, still carrying 2 lightsabers and a machete, and the complete indifference of something that hadn't noticed or didn't care that the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years had just landed on the same dead moon. Then we're about to find out, he finally said, whether the darkest thing in this galaxy has ever encountered something it cannot corrupt, cannot threaten, and cannot survive. Darth Sidious walked across Calor's surface like a man taking a morning constitutional. No guards, no dramatic entrance beyond the ship's ramp descending in the pale light. Just a figure in dark robes moving across dead terrain with the unhurried certainty of someone who had not, in 1,000 years of Sith history, encountered a situation that ultimately didn't bend to his will. Obi-Wan and Anakin watched from the ridge above, neither speaking. The specific silence of two men who'd agreed without words that whatever was about to happen needed to happen without their interference. Not because they'd chosen restraint exactly, but because something in the calculus of the moment made every intervention feel like the wrong variable to introduce. "He's not using the Force to mask his presence," Anakin said quietly. "He's walking out there fully, visible, identifiable, everything broadcasting. He wants to be seen." Obi-Wan's eyes tracked Sidious across the terrain below. He wants the thing to know exactly what's coming toward it. No ambiguity, no confusion about what it's dealing with. A measured exhale. It's the oldest Sith opening. Project the full weight of what you are before a single word is spoken. Let the power do the first negotiation. Does he know it can't feel the Force? I think he's about to find out. Below them, the figure had stopped. Not in response to Sidious's approach. It had been standing at the anomaly's edge for the last hour. The same motionless quality it always settled into when there was nothing in its immediate path requiring response. Two lightsabers at its belt. Machete in its right hand. White mask angled toward the horizon with the patience of something that measured time differently than anything that had evolved in this galaxy. Sidious stopped 20 meters away. Obi-Wan was too far to hear what passed between them, but he could read posture and distance, and what he read was a man deploying, with extraordinary precision, everything in his considerable arsenal. The Force pressure came first. He felt it even from the ridge. Sidious pushing his dark side presence outward like a physical force. The specific technique that had made senators faint, that had bent experienced Jedi off their center, that had driven lesser beings to their knees through pure, concentrated projection of power. The figure didn't move, didn't shift its weight. The white mask didn't orient toward Sidious any differently than it had oriented toward Grievous, toward Obi-Wan, toward every other thing that had put itself in front of it across the last several days. Sidious recalibrated. Obi-Wan could see it in the subtle adjustment of his posture, the withdrawal of the Force pressure, the shift to something quieter, more personal, the technique he used in Senate chambers rather than battlefields, the gentle approach, the offer wrapped in warmth, the hand extended rather than the fist projected, the figure's head tilted, that fractional angle of processing, the same tilt Ropal had seen, the same tilt Obi-Wan had seen, the same tilt Grievous had seen from a distance before choosing to stop seeing it up close. Anakin had gone absolutely rigid beside Obi-Wan. He's trying the voice, the way he talks to me, the personal way. Something raw moved underneath the professional observation. I've never watched him use it on someone else from the outside. Obi-Wan said nothing. He was watching Sidious's body language with the particular attention of a Jedi who'd spent the last 6 days building a model of what this figure responded to, and cross-referencing every move Sidious made against it. Sidious reached into his robe, slowly, deliberately telegraphing the motion, nothing threatening, and produced something small, an object. Obi-Wan's scanner at this distance resolved it as a kyber crystal, red, glowing faint in Collar's pale light. An offering, a demonstration of understanding. I know what you carry. I recognize what you've taken. I speak the language of power. The figure looked at it, the white mask oriented toward the crystal in Sidious's outstretched hand. The same processing tilt, the same alien patience. Then it took a step forward. Sidious remained still, and Obi-Wan could read, even at this distance, the particular controlled satisfaction of a man watching his approach work. The stillness of someone maintaining a pose, because breaking it would cost the momentum he'd built. The figure took another step, now 10 meters, now 8. He thinks it's working, Anakin breathed. He's reading it the way he reads everything, Obi-Wan said quietly, as a being with wants that can be identified and offered back to it. The figure stopped 6 meters from Sidious, and for a moment the two of them stood in the pale light of a dead moon. The most powerful dark side practitioner in a millennium, and something that had arrived from beyond this galaxy's reality, carrying the lightsabers of everyone who'd tried to stop it. And the stillness between them had a weight to it that Obi-Wan felt even from the ridge. Sidious said something else. One final offer, from the look of it, his posture shifting to the specific configuration he used when closing a negotiation, the lean forward, the lowering of the projection, the intimacy of man to man rather than power to power. The figure's hand moved. Not to the lightsabers, not to the machete. Just a hand, reaching out. And what happened next lasted less than 4 seconds, which was approximately 3 seconds and 59/10 longer than anything had ever lasted against Darth Sidious in the history of the Sith Order. Anakin made a sound Obi-Wan had never heard from him before. Not horror, not triumph, something between the two, a completely involuntary exhale of disbelief that bypassed every layer of trained composure. Sidious hit the ground of Calor's dead moon, the way things hit the ground when the person holding them up stops considering gravity negotiable. Immediately, completely, without the graceful, controlled descent that someone of his power should have managed. He didn't stay there. He rose, and what rose was different from what had walked across the terrain a few minutes ago. The composure was intact. Technically, the robes adjusted, the posture reconstructed, the performance of control reassembled with the speed of a man who'd spent centuries never letting anyone see him genuinely off balance. But his hand was moving to his lightsaber. The red blade ignited with the crack hiss that Obi-Wan had heard in his worst nightmares and twice in waking life. And Sidious moved into Juyo with the fluid brutality of a man who'd stopped negotiating and decided, for the first time in longer than most civilizations had existed, to simply end something. The saber connected with the machete and held, not sparking through it the way plasma cut through everything, not severing the ancient metal the way a lightsaber severed everything. Held, locked, the machete's edge refusing the plasma the way it had refused Ropal's blade in the corridor on the first night. Sidious pushed more power into it, dark side flooding the blade until the air around it warped with heat, and the figure, for the first time since it had arrived in this galaxy, pushed back. Not with the force, with its hand. Bare, physical force driving the locked blade sideways, the raw strength of something that had never needed the force, because whatever it was built from was stronger than anything the force had been asked to contest before. Sidious used force lightning. Blue-white energy cracked from his fingers, with a sound like the sky tearing. The most destructive, pure force technique in the Sith arsenal, enough to stop a human heart at a distance and strip a force-sensitive's connection to the light in a single sustained burst. It hit the figure square in the chest. The figure staggered, one step back, then it found its footing, and Obi-Wan, watching from the ridge, felt his breath catch at the specific quality of that stagger. Not injury, not pain, the involuntary physical response of something that had registered an unusual input and was processing it. The way you stagger when a noise is louder than expected, and then you're fine, and then you continue what you were doing. The figure continued what it was doing. Sidious released another bolt, and another, sustained now, the kind of output that had once held 3 Jedi Masters in place simultaneously, and the figure walked through it, slower than before, the lightning clearly registering as something, but the walk still forward, still directional, still the patient, inexorable movement of something that had a destination and had not yet been given a reason to stop going there. Sidious moved. In all his years watching the Chancellor, Obi-Wan had never seen him move fast. There was always the performance of ease, the demonstration that urgency was beneath him. He moved now, repositioning with the speed his true form had always hidden, and the gap between them that had been closing became a gap again. And then he did something that stopped both Jedi on the ridge cold. He ran. Not tactically repositioned, not strategically withdrew. The most powerful Sith Lord in recorded history turned away from a target that had walked through his lightning, that had locked his saber with a rusted machete, that had put him on the ground in less than 4 seconds, and he ran for his ship with the barely contained speed of a man who had finally, for the first time, performed a threat assessment that came back with an answer he couldn't argue with. His ramp was still closing when the engines ignited. His ship cleared Calor's atmosphere before the figure had finished watching it go. On the ridge, nobody spoke for a very long time. Cody's voice, when it finally came through the comm, carried the flat, exhausted quality of a man who'd used up his capacity for surprise several days ago and was now simply reporting facts. Generals, the Sith ship has left the system. A beat. I've been a soldier my whole life. I don't think I'll ever say a stranger sentence than that one." Obi-Wan exhaled. Below, on Kalar's surface, the figure turned back toward the anomaly and resumed walking east. Same pace, same heading, same patient certainty, now carrying 2 Jedi lightsabers, 1 Sith lightsaber, and a machete that had just stood against the full power of the Sith Order and come away unmarked. "He couldn't feel it," Anakin said, and his voice had gone somewhere very quiet. Sidious walked out there fully open in the Force, all that power broadcasting, and the thing didn't react to it. Not as power, not as darkness, not as anything it needed to be afraid of. A silence. Because it can't feel the Force, which means it can't feel what Sidious is. Which means Sidious's entire arsenal assumes an opponent who registers the dark side as threatening. And this one doesn't register it at all. Obi-Wan stood, eyes still tracking the figure below. You cannot intimidate something that cannot feel your power. You cannot corrupt something that cannot detect your influence. You cannot negotiate with something that has no framework for what you're offering. He turned to Anakin, and his expression carried something that had moved beyond the ordinary gravity of this week's events into something rarer. We have just watched the entirety of Sith philosophy fail completely against a single opponent. Not because the opponent was more powerful in the Force, because the opponent was outside the Force entirely. Anakin stared at him. The Sith built everything on the idea that power is the universal language. Yes. And this thing doesn't speak it, doesn't hear it, Obi-Wan corrected quietly. There's a difference. A man who refuses to hear you has made a choice. This thing simply cannot receive the transmission. The frequency doesn't exist for it. He looked back down at the figure, now small in the distance, moving east toward the anomaly with the same unhurried pace it had maintained since the moment it arrived. Which makes it the most genuinely ungovernable thing this galaxy has ever encountered. Not because it's chosen to resist, because the very concept of being governed requires a shared language, and this thing has no shared language with anything here. From somewhere far across the galaxy, on a ship now in hyperspace, moving away from a dead moon at maximum speed, Darth Sidious sat in the silence of his private cabin and performed, for the first time in a very long time, the specific calculus of a man who had just encountered his own limitation. Not defeat, he would never classify it as defeat, but a boundary, the first real one he'd touched in decades, and the cold, patient intelligence behind his yellow eyes was already turning over the implications of what a boundary, in this galaxy, at this moment, actually meant. The council chamber had hosted difficult conversations before. It had hosted the revelation of Order 66's existence, the confirmation of Dooku's fall to the dark side, the first reports of a Sith Lord operating within the Republic itself. It had hosted grief and strategic failure and the particular silence that followed news nobody had the right framework to process. It had never hosted this. Darth Sidious fled, Mace Windu said. Not a question, not disbelief. The specific flat recitation of a man reading a report he'd reviewed 6 times, trying to find the error, and finding none. Withdrew under combat pressure, Obi-Wan said, because precision mattered, and he refused to let the moment inflate itself beyond what the facts supported. He made a tactical assessment and acted on it. Obi-Wan. Windu's voice carried the weight of a man who'd spent his entire career treating language carefully. Darth Sidious ran. A silence across the full council. From something that cannot be felt in the Force, Master Yoda said, eyes closed, the particular stillness that meant he was doing the thing nobody else in the room could do. Reading not the event, but the event's resonance in the Force, the shape the universe made around something it couldn't name. Invisible it is, not hidden, not masked, invisible. The distinction matters, Obi-Wan said. Hidden implies something the Force should be able to find if it looks harder. This is something the Force has no mechanism for finding at all. Different category of problem, different category of danger, Windu said. If Sidious can't control it, nobody can control it. Anakin's voice came from the chamber's edge, where he'd been standing since they arrived, present physically, his mind clearly still somewhere on Kalar's pale surface. That's the whole point. Everything in this galaxy, every faction, every philosophy, every weapon, assumes an opponent that operates within the same set of rules. Force or no force, light side or dark side, republic or separatist. This thing doesn't operate within the rules. It doesn't know the rules exist. Then, how do we stop it? Asked Ki-Adi-Mundi, and the question landed with the heaviness of something everyone in the room had been circling, and nobody had wanted to be the one to say first. Obi-Wan was quiet a moment, not uncertain, building towards something. "We don't," he said. The chamber absorbed that. "What we do," he continued, "is understand what it actually wants, which, as far as we can determine, is the same thing it has wanted since the moment it arrived on Kalar. It wants to go home." He pulled up the topographical scan on the chamber's central projector, the anomaly's edge, the scar in the ground, the directional trail that had never once deviated from its heading. It arrived through a crack in the reality of this galaxy. It's been trying to find its way back to that crack ever since. Everything that died on Kalar, and I want to be clear about this, because how we understand it matters for what we do next, died because it got between this thing and where it was trying to go. The Council processed that in the specific silence of people revising a fundamental assumption mid-thought. "You're saying if we simply let it reach the anomaly," Plo Koon said carefully. "I'm saying that's a question worth examining before we commit to any other course of action." Obi-Wan looked around the chamber. "We've tried confrontation. Republic, Separatist, Sith. We've tried force, superior numbers, droids, lightning, lightsabers. Every approach this galaxy knows how to make, we've made, and none of them changed its direction or its pace. They only produced casualties. And if we let it reach the anomaly," Windu said, "and the anomaly opens, and something else comes through?" The question sat in the air, unanswerable, the exact shape of a problem that had no clean resolution, only choices with different kinds of cost attached to them. On Kalar's surface, 600 kilometers below anyone's current conversation, the figure reached the anomaly's edge. It stopped, stood at the scar in the ground for a long moment, 2 Jedi lightsabers and 1 Sith lightsaber at its belt, machete in its right hand, white mask angled toward the compressed earth, as if reading something written there in a language only it possessed. Then, it crouched, one massive hand pressing flat against the fused ground, and from its palm, faintly, barely visible in Kalar's pale light, something that wasn't force energy and wasn't technology pulsed outward into the scar, like a key turning in a lock, like a frequency being broadcast on a channel this galaxy had never thought to monitor. The ground responded, not dramatically, no lightning, no vortex, no theatrical display of dimensional energy tearing itself open the way the stories always suggested these things looked. Just a sound, low, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears, and a shimmer in the air above the scar that lasted approximately 4 seconds before resolving into an opening that was less a portal and more an absence. A clean, rectangular absence of Kalar's terrain, showing something beyond it that was dark and wet and had its own specific gravity. Camp Crystal Lake, in the rain, in the dark, in the particular quiet of a place that had been waiting. The figure straightened, looked at the opening for a long moment with the same processing tilt it had given everything else in this galaxy. Not relief, not urgency, not any recognizable emotional register. Just the confirmation of something that needed to be confirmed. It stepped through. The absence closed behind it, quietly, completely, with less drama than a door shutting, the scar in Kalar's ground refusing the way scar tissue settles after the wound beneath it has finally closed. And then there was nothing at the anomaly's edge, just dead ground and pale light, and the wind moving across terrain that held, if you knew how to read it, the specific stillness of a place where something very large had recently stopped happening. In the council chamber, Anakin's wrist scanner registered the anomaly's closure simultaneously. He stared at the readout for a moment, then looked up. It's gone. The chamber absorbed that too, differently than it had absorbed everything else this week. Lighter, but not clean. The specific, complicated relief of people who'd wanted something to be over, and now that it was over, weren't entirely sure what to do with the shape of what remained. "Ropal," Ki-Adi-Mundi said quietly. "Not a question. A name, given its weight. And the others, Obi-Wan said. Yes. The silence that followed was the right kind. The kind that honored something rather than avoided it. Windu leaned forward, elbows on the arms of his chair. Something in his expression that wasn't entirely the council master now. More the soldier underneath the title. If that anomaly opened once, it can open again. Yes, Obi-Wan said. And whatever opened it from the other side the first time, whatever crack in reality let this thing through, we have no way to monitor it, predict it, or prevent it. Also yes. Then we post a permanent watch on Kallar's outer belt, Windu said, the decision settling into his voice with the finality of a man who'd learned that incomplete solutions were still solutions. We document everything we observed. We develop protocols, not for fighting it, since we've established that's not a viable option, for recognizing it early and clearing the path, minimizing what stands between it and wherever it's trying to go. Coexistence through understanding, Plo Koon said. Coexistence through not getting in the way, Anakin said, drier than he'd been all week, which is a lesson that cost us significantly more than it should have. Nobody disagreed with that. Yoda opened his eyes, slowly, the return from wherever his meditation had taken him, carrying the specific gravity of someone who'd read something in the Force that the Force would rather have kept to itself. Gone it is, for now. The small Jedi's gaze moved around the chamber, settling on each face in turn. But disturbed, the Force remains, a wound left by this thing's passage. Not darkness, not evil, simply the mark of something the galaxy was not built to hold. His eyes found Obi-Wan's. Heals, such wounds do, given time. But remember, the Force does. What passed through it once, passes through the memory of it always. You're saying it might come back, Anakin said. Come back? Perhaps? Come through elsewhere? Certain. Yoda's ears lowered fractionally. One crack there was. Natural, or so we believed. One arrival, unexpected. But a thing that opens a door from the other side once, has learned the door exists. The chamber's quiet deepened, and things that learn a door exists, in my experience, rarely forget the address. The council sat with that for a long moment, and outside the temple's tall windows, Coruscant's endless skyline burned with the ordinary light of a civilization that had spent the last week being afraid of something it never managed to fully see, that had watched the Jedi and the Sith and everyone between them try every tool they possessed and come away with nothing but the education of failure. And that was now, for the time being, safe, in the way that people are safe when a storm has passed and nobody yet knows whether the season is over or just beginning. On the wall of the Council archive, newly added to a section labeled Unclassified Phenomena, a data entry read, Kallar Incident. Duration, 9 days. Casualties, classified. Nature of subject, undetermined. Threat classification, cannot be assigned. Status, resolved. Subject departed of own volition. Recommendation, maintain surveillance of Kallar anomaly site. Secondary recommendation, if subject returns, do not engage. Do not attempt containment. Do not attempt negotiation. Do not stand between it and where it is going. Additional note, appended by Master O. Kenobi. In 9 days of observation, the subject was offered combat, firepower, droid armies, force lightning, Sith manipulation, and the full diplomatic resources of 2 galactic factions. It wanted none of these things. It wanted only what all things, in the end, want. To find its way back to the place it came from. We should have recognized that sooner. The cost of not recognizing it will remain on our conscience considerably longer. In the wet dark of Camp Crystal Lake, far from any galaxy, the rain fell on still water and pine, and the specific silence of a place that held its secrets, the way deep water holds things. Completely, without effort, without end. Nothing moved. Nothing needed to. But deep beneath the lake's surface, in the cold and the dark and the patient quiet of something that had been in this place longer than anyone who'd ever come looking for it, a faint shimmer moved. The same frequency, the same pulse, the same key that had opened a door in the ground of a dead moon, 7,000 light-years away. Testing, not urgently, not with any particular intent that could be named. Just checking, the way you check a door you know you've used before, to see if it still opens.